So my name is Jacqueline Murray, and I work with DardenLentz. I'm the marketing strategist with DardenLentz, and we are a marketing and branding agency that focuses on healthcare. Not only do I work for an agency that focuses on healthcare, but in a past life, before working with DardenLentz, I worked with medical device companies and diagnostic companies in a marketing capacity. And so I'm very familiar with the challenges that are facing a company that are commercializing new products. And you know, I know firsthand that there's a lot riding on your product launch. My compensation and my future success depended on it at one point in my career. So I really do understand those challenges. And having a commercialization plan is really a major part of being able to minimize the risk of your product launch. There's a lot that's been invested. You've got product development, clinical trials, or clinical testing that's gone on, regulatory approvals, perhaps lobbying for reimbursement. There's a whole host of things that go into making your product available to the market. And by having a commercialization plan, you have a way to start to assess what are the gaps in your overall strategy. And you have a chance then to put together the resources and the information that you're going to need in order to make your product launch a success. And I think the other really important aspect of having a commercialization plan is that it gives you time to plan and time to adjust. And today, hopefully by the time I'm done talking to you, you'll have a better appreciation of really what goes into that process, and you'll be convinced that everything that I've said on this slide is actually true. One of the tips that I'd like to include in this talk is that, you know, when you talk about entrepreneurial companies, one of the things that having a commercialization plan will really do for you is it does give you a documentation of a really cohesive and comprehensive strategy. And that's going to really help build credibility, both with the people you're attracting to the company, but also with investors, with other stakeholders. So having this coherent plan, a really robust commercialization plan, is a really important part of being able to present your business to the business community and to potential people that might want to join your organization that you're trying to recruit. So who usually owns or drives the commercialization process? In my experience, it's generally somebody in a marketing function that owns it. In larger organizations, this might be a product manager or a marketing manager, someone who has responsibility for the upstream marketing capacity, the product development aspects of marketing. But it really is a plan that requires a great deal of cross-functional input. So it's marketing, from product development, from regulatory, sales, operations even. And one of the temptations in a smaller organization is actually to let everyone kind of look after their own part of the world. And one of the keys to a success of a really good commercialization plan is to have someone who actually owns the plan. Someone who's going to be responsible for pulling together all the different parts of this kind of complex animal. You want to make sure that there's somebody who's pulling it all together to help you have a really coherent strategy. And there's a lot of benefit to having one person who's the keeper of the commercialization plan. That could be the VP of Sales and Marketing. It could be a product manager. It should be at least one person who really has the full picture and is responsible for pulling together all those diverse parts. Oftentimes, people use the term launch plan when they think a commercialization plan. And I really prefer to think of a commercialization plan as something much bigger than that. I would like to classify it as a business plan that is focused on a particular product and its launch. So it's more than just about the launch. It's really about making that complete case, that comprehensive picture of what the product is, how it's going to be launched, who is involved, the whole who, what, why, when, and how of the commercialization of that product. And it, as I said before, it rolls up a lot of disciplines plans. And so it's kind of the master plan of all the other plans. And so in this presentation, I'm kind of going to go through the presentation of lists. That's what I would call this. And there are basically 8 big subject areas that go into a commercialization plan. And what I'm going to do is walk through each of these 8 areas and talk about why that part of the plan is important, what goes into it, and basically create what is essentially a template for a commercialization plan by the time we're done this presentation. So the first part of a plan, just like any good business plan, is you're going to describe your market. You have to describe the market from a financial perspective. Obviously, you need to know how big it is, what your business case can be based on. But in marketing and selling to hospitals with a medical device, there's another dimension, and that dimension is the clinical dimension. And it's really important to define that clinical dimension really well, because you need to understand what is your truly addressable market with that particular product or service. For example, say you have a product that is for the treatment of stroke patients. There's 800,000 strokes in the United States every year. Is your addressable market 800,000? Or is your product one that's used in the ER? So how many of those 800,000 people actually make it to the ER? Well, then maybe it needs to be more specific, because your particular therapy is treatment for a stroke in the ER for people that have made it there within an hour. So what is that actual addressable market? So really digging in and understanding the clinical environment that you're working in addition to the size of the market. It's tempting to say, I have a huge market. I can address stroke. It's a giant problem in the United States. But really, your market is much smaller than that. And you need to understand that foundation, because your market description is really the fundamental business case for your product. And you need to have that data in order to support other parts of your plan when you start to build your sales model and your placement plans and other plans. So this is a really important aspect of the commercialization plan. What goes into this part of the plan? Obviously the market size, but are there other factors that you need to consider when you're looking at describing the market? Are there macroeconomic issues? Are there demographic trends that need to be considered? Again, disease states, what's the procedure? What are the applications? What alternatives are there? Understanding the environment, whether it's more of a consumer acquired medical product or if it's a physician prescription product. What does the competitive landscape look like? What is the reimbursement? So lots of things go into considering this description of what the market space that you're going to be playing in with your commercialization plan. The second one seems completely obvious, no-brainer. You need to know what your product is, and you need to describe your product. So what exactly is it that you do? What is it? What does your product do? What doesn't it do? And probably the most important bullet point on this slide is, how are you supporting your marketing claims? What you need to be able to establish at this point in your plan is, what are you going to need to have to say about this product in order to make it commercially successful? Now, we think this is an extremely important topic. We actually have an entire session devoted to this, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that, but I will give you a small example. As you're working on the commercialization plan, say I was the marketing person responsible for it, I want to make sure I can make a claim that the handpiece to my device is the lightest handpiece out there. So I write a requirement into the product requirements document that says, I want a handpiece that weighs 1 pound. And that, to me, is the lightest one that's out there. If you have a commercialization plan where you've clearly articulated that, when you come to a design review or a period of time where you're going over your product with the rest of the team, you can say, does the product now weigh 1 pound? If the R&D team says, no, it weighs 1.5 pounds, then there's a decision point and you can put a plan in place. Maybe 1.5 pounds is still the lightest, and marketing says, oh, okay, I can give a little. I think that's going to be all right. Or we have to decide whether marketing has to live without that claim. We think we have to not be able to say we're the lightest. Or do we need to go back to the drawing board from an R&D perspective and add some time or some testing or some other part to the project in order to meet that marketing claim? So really articulating these things in your plan very clearly is a way to keep the entire team on the same page and understanding what it's going to take for your product to be commercially successful. So the other part, the other tip here is that when you're clearly stating these goals, you also create the foundation for the other marketing things you're going to need to do. And the product specifications become the foundation for your value proposition. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next couple of slides. What goes into your product specifications? I've mentioned a lot of these things already. The product description, you might include pricing in this section. You'll certainly include claims and what evidence you have to support them. what is the regulatory status, or what is the approval pathway that you're seeking? Are there clinical trials planned or testing planned? What other clinical inputs from your clinical affairs team? And then also looking at, what are best practices and centers of excellence so that you can understand how you'll be presenting this to KOLs or other investigators. Another really important part of your commercialization plan is to be able to define your segments and select your customer targets. So there are lots of different ways to do segmentation. And what's important here is you need to understand what the axes are that are important to you. So perhaps the segmentation is an exercise around the clinical area. So this is a product for orthopedics. But you need to understand, is that a small enough segment for you to actually be able to target? Do you need to subspecialty? Do you need to say it's an orthopedic product for lower extremity surgeons? Or is it an orthopedic product for ankle surgeons? So how specific do you need to be in order to really adequately target your product and have your product addressing its most valuable segment? And then who will be touched in the sales process? There are lots of other people besides the primary user. Who is going to be involved in that process, and who will be the ones that will be either influencers or decision makers or gatekeepers or blocks in the sales process, and understanding who all those people are. And then really, we'll talk about this a lot more in the second talk that I'll give later on this morning about being very effective in your marketing and branding. But I'll just mention here that developing persona profiles, really understanding all these different kinds of customers and buyers as real people, is also a really important foundational piece that goes into your commercialization process. One of the reasons why segmentation is really important is because you want to make sure you're identifying the best fit segment for your product. And there's a very practical reason for that. You can say, my product's great for everybody. But if you can really identify those best fit segments and targets, that's how you're going to win quickly. And you really want to make sure that you're very focused and zeroed in on those people that will have the most benefit, or that the product's the best fit, because that's how you're going to drive the initial commercial success, particularly with a new product that's novel or innovative. You really need to find out where is this going to win, and win fast and early. Inputs to your segmentation, well, obviously there's going to be some inputs from your market work, the work that you've done, the larger market segments that you're playing in. You're going to look at the target customers. You'll look at your persona, the primary users, decision makers, and influencers, who are key opinion leaders, who could be advocates, and then really try to dig down and understand the motivations and goals and values of those people, and really create well-rounded picture of who your target customer and segment is. Any good marketing textbook has a definition of a value proposition. It's kind of one of those things that every marketing person has to do, is write the value proposition for the product. Essentially, there are lots of different formulas, but what it really is, it boils down to is, what does your product do? Who does it do it for? And why is it better than anything else that's out there? Or why is it better than the alternative? And this is a really important thing to state clearly, because it gives you a chance to really evaluate where you stand with your product. And being able to clearly articulate that is really the foundation for all the positioning and messaging and branding that you're going to do for your product. So this seems like a fairly simple step, but sometimes it is really hard to just boil your product down to a simple sentence that says, what do I do better than anybody else, and how am I doing that? So the things that go into the value proposition, your product specifications, obviously the claims that you're going to be making about the product, and then understanding your target segments and the customers, and the competitive landscape for the product. So how do you line up against your competitors? You want to make sure that you have a unique value proposition, so that what you are offering has a benefit better than anyone else's. So you want to be able to look at what your competitors are saying about themselves, what position they are holding, in order to have a really good value proposition. After you have a value proposition, really the next part of this plan is to really understand your positioning and your branding. And a position is simply the space you want to occupy in your customer's mind. Your brand is bigger than that. Your brand is everything that you want your customer to experience or understand about your company and your product. To give you an example, a position might be, innovative technology from a reliable partner. But the brand is everything you deliver in order to support that position. So you have really great technology that's very innovative. Your sales reps are knowledgeable. You have great customer service. Your packaging is very user-friendly and really, really well designed. So all of the things that go into what your product is what builds your brand. Obviously, I work for a marketing and branding agency, so your logo is important and how your ads look and all that. But that isn't what your brand is. That's the expression of your brand. Your brand really encompasses all that total offering as you present yourself to the world and to your customers. One of the reasons why it's really important to do this part well is, first of all, a lot of people don't do it well, and so you can actually make yourself stand out in the crowd by doing this well. But it also helps you, sets you up in order to really connect with your customers on an emotional level. So if you have a really strong positioning, something that means something to them, and your brand supports that positioning, that's a way to instill loyalty in your customers and also to have them really connect with your brand, which will make you memorable. And particularly if you're a small fish in a big pond, being memorable is a really important thing. So what are the things that go into your positioning and branding? Obviously, your unique value proposition, or UVP, understanding who you're selling to, the persona, your brand standards, the names and logos, your packaging, your labeling, and then importantly, the messages that you're going to convey about yourself and about your product. So a lot of things go into this part of your commercialization plan. I'm going to make a little sidetrack here into labeling. I spent quite a number of years as a marketing person on product development teams, and I am not an expert in labeling, but I've been beaten up by my regulatory people for so many years. I've learned a couple of things, and the very simple lesson on labeling is absolutely everything is labeling. It's not just the package, it's not just what's in the product insert, it's not the instruction sheet. It's your advertising, it's your brochure, it's your flyer, it's your booth graphic. It's everything that we produce as marketing people, it's labeling. And the reason why I bring this up at this point is that you really need to understand that you need to have documentation to support your labeling and the claims that you want to make. And a critical part of the commercialization planning process is to evaluate what do you need to say and what to make this product commercially successful, and then can we support that? And I put this in kind of with all the marketing and branding things because I've been through this loop with my product development teams lots of times. Can we support the claim? Yes, that's great. I got a claim, I can move forward. No, what do we do about that? And so by having these things really clearly articulated in your commercialization plan, and they will evolve over time as your products evolve, and that's okay, but at least you have a checkpoint where you can go back and say, yes, I can make the claims that I need to do in order to make my product successful. Coming to number 6 here, the business model and the sales structure. This can be an entire plan unto itself. I've summarized it into one slide, but this is certainly a major part of your plan. So the business model and sales structure, so what is your financial model? In a very small organization that has one product that's coming to market, this could be pretty much the business plan for the company. In a larger organization where there are many different products that are being developed in parallel by different departments or divisions, this could be the division's business model for that particular product. I'm not going to get into a ton about the sales structure and how to sell your product because we have Dawn here that's going to talk about that later this morning. But in your commercialization plan, this is where you're going to do that gut check. You might not know out of the gate that your sales reps can do 3 placements a month. I actually have had organizations that are well established, where you work with the sales guys do, we can do X calls a month. That usually works out to be 5 sales a month or 5 placements a month. You might not know that, but if you look at your sales ramp and your sales model and your business model, and it says you're placing 100 systems a month and you have 2 sales reps, you kind of have a chance to go, maybe that's not going to work. And if that's what your revenue model is saying, you might need to do a little bit of checking. Or you might want to look at, in terms of your organization, what resources do you really need to make this product successful? Is 2 sales reps going to be enough? Do I need 10? I think this is what the power of a commercialization plan is, by taking all of these subspecialty plans, putting them together side by side, putting all these moving parts into a picture, and say, what do I really need to do from a budget, from a human capital perspective, and what resources do I need to make this product launch successful? So going into this business model, and certainly a lot of things, I've shortened the list here, and probably every single thing on this list is another plan onto itself. But what is your market that you're addressing? What does your pricing model look like? That's like a whole other ball of wax, what you're going to price this product at. The sales model, what does your sales structure look like? What does your revenue plan look like? What are all the different other business measures that you're going to look at? What's your ASP? What's your market share goals? All of those things would go into this plan. And then, of course, your sales structure, what is that going to look like? And then the overall budget for this particular product and its launch. So as I said in the beginning, this is like way more stuff for one slide, but it is really a critical part of the plan, because this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the money part of the plan. This next one is the marketing and the launch plan. And I called it a launch plan because this is the part of the plan that talks about that rollout section of the product. How are you really going to bring it into the market? That might be a period of 12 to 18 months, or depending on how you frame your launch, but it's what happens before you come into the market, when you're actually at launch, and then as you roll out the product. And it defines the strategy for the launch and the tactics that you will use to execute that launch. And I think what's really important here is that you're really designing a plan to do a continuum of things. You want to drive awareness about your product, then you want to drive the sales and adoption of your product, and it identifies what you're going to what you're going to need in your bag in order to accomplish that. And so a lot of things go into this part of your plan. You have your promotional strategy, a communication plan, or a launch plan that actually says what we're going to say to who, when, and how. What is your marketing collateral? So what are the materials that you're going to need? Do you need a new website? What do you need in order to support the launch for this product? And then you can also include in this section things like the sales training and support. Do you have to train a sales force? Do you have to have training presentations? Do you have to have sales cue cards or other materials to help your sales reps learn the product, or to train your distributors in the event that you're in an indirect sales organization? And then what about your customers? What do you need to train them in order that they can successfully use the product? What other materials or other marketing collateral do you need to help support your product being taken up by their organization? And last, but certainly not least, the world doesn't end with product launches. I think that it's really exciting, but it's just the beginning. At that point is when you really want to be driving the success of your product from a sales perspective, but you also have your responsibility in a medical field to really be tracking the product's performance. And so you want to know the product's success, but then from a marketing perspective, the launch success. So you want to be really understanding how your product is performing and how your communications are resonating with your customers. And it is a requirement that you do follow-up for regulated devices, but it also gives you a really good input for future product development. You get to learn a lot when it comes to once you're out on the market. You learn the challenges that your customers have. You might find unmet needs. You might get new ideas for product development, what's next in the pipeline. How do you prioritize what's next in your pipeline? You might have 10 ideas on how to improve the product, but if 4 of them are really, really ones that customers are asking for and would desire, you know how to prioritize those in your R&D in the future. So a really important part of your plan is your post-launch activities. And lots of things to consider in that section. You want to obviously have a plan for post-market surveillance. So how are you going to evaluate how your product is performing in the field? A complaint process or a complaint analysis process is a really important part of your infrastructure going forward. How are you going to do that? I always had in my plans as a marketing and product manager customer visits afterwards, because there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth. So you have somebody who's using your product, go out in the field, have a plan for that, go out and listen to them, see what they're saying, whether they like it, whether they don't like it. It's probably more important to go to the ones that don't like it than the ones that like it. Not a fun visit sometimes, but it's really important for you to get that voice of customer input. It helps you with your messaging, it helps you with your future product development, and it certainly helps you from building a community of believers when you meet with people and you help them through the process of adopting your product. And then, of course, if you have ongoing clinical trials or data, that would also be something that would be an input at this part in the process. So just some tips at the end. I think I'm probably running ahead because I talk really fast. Is everybody okay? You haven't like overwhelmed everyone. My biggest tip is start early. I can remember thinking to myself as the very early product manager, thinking, why am I writing a commercialization plan when we don't have a product? I remember thinking that seemed like a ridiculous activity. I don't know what to put in this plan. There's like nothing in here. I've learned the value of that, and the reason why companies with really developed product development processes always have a commercialization plan draft at the concept phase for the product. It's because it really helps you to understand what you're missing. If you know what you're missing, then you know how you can plan for it. And you don't want to wait to the very end. It's just too late then. So the more comprehensive you make that plan, the more encompassing it is at the beginning, even if it's just an outline with a bunch of blank things that are TBD, to be determined in the future, it's okay because it really highlights what you need to do from voice of customer research. Do I need to go and talk to customers? Do I need to buy some research because I don't really understand this market quite as well as I do? Do I need to revise my product development plan? Do I need to do something different? And so really the biggest tip is start early in the process and continue to evolve the plan over time. Expect that it's going to change. Again, comes back to the very beginning when I said there needs to be someone who owns that plan, because you want to have someone who is really keeping track of all of the moving parts. How are you going to evaluate how your product is performing in the field? A complaint process or a complaint analysis process is a really important part of your infrastructure going forward. How are you going to do that? I always had in my plans as a marketing and product manager customer visits afterwards, because there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth. So you have somebody who's using your product, go out in the field, have a plan for that, go out and listen to them, see what they're saying, whether they like it, whether they don't like it. It's probably more important to go to the ones that don't like it than the ones that like it. Not a fun visit sometimes, but it's really important for you to get that voice of customer input. It helps you with your messaging, it helps you with your future product development, and it certainly helps you from building a community of believers when you meet with people and you help them through the process of adopting your product. And then, of course, if you have ongoing clinical trials or data, that would also be something that would be an input at this part in the process. So just some tips at the end. I think I'm probably running ahead because I talk really fast. Is everybody okay? You haven't like overwhelmed everyone. My biggest tip is start early. I can remember thinking to myself as the very early product manager, thinking, why am I writing a commercialization plan when we don't have a product? I remember thinking that seemed like a ridiculous activity. I don't know what to put in this plan. There's like nothing in here. I've learned the value of that, and the reason why companies with really developed product development processes always have a commercialization plan draft at the concept phase for the product. It's because it really helps you to understand what you're missing. If you know what you're missing, then you know how you can plan for it. And you don't want to wait to the very end. It's just too late then. So the more comprehensive you make that plan, the more encompassing it is at the beginning, even if it's just an outline with a bunch of blank things that are TBD, to be determined in the future, it's okay because it really highlights what you need to do from voice of customer research. Do I need to go and talk to customers? Do I need to buy some research because I don't really understand this market quite as well as I do? Do I need to revise my product development plan? Do I need to do something different? And so really the biggest tip is start early in the process and continue to evolve the plan over time. Expect that it's going to change. Again, comes back to the very beginning when I said there needs to be someone who owns that plan, because you want to have someone who is really keeping track of all of the moving parts of your commercialization process.